Now, listen to this. A preschooler's language should really be pretty good. Not quite as good as an adult's, but you should be able to carry on a pretty good conversation with a 4-year-old, and certainly with a 5-year-old. So, how is your child's speech and language coming along? Well, let's see. I'm Tara Tuck, and I help parents, preschool teachers, and all of you who care for young children to learn everything you need to know about speech and language, the most important part of child development. In this video, I'm going to tell you how your child's language develops from the stage of very simple sentences to the stage in which he or she learns to speak in much more complex and grammatically correct sentences, the speech of a 4- and 5-year-old. I'm a speech and language pathologist and the author of The Joy of Language, the Guide to Language and Learning for Parents and Caregivers. I've given you that link below. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos and visit my website. As I explained in my last video, there are so many ways you can encourage your child to begin using short sentences of 2 or 3 words, and then soon, though, he'll begin using sentences that are whole strings of words that are even grammatically correct. Actually, in the first 4 or 5 years, your child should be using sentences very much like an adult. You can have a pretty good conversation with most 5-year-olds, right? So here's how they get there. Toddlers quickly progress from 1 to 2-word utterances, and there is a normal range of time for this to happen. They'll learn to speak different types of sentences when they're ready, even when parents try to teach them more complex sentences. In fact, when parents correct what a child has said, they correct for truthfulness, not the grammar. For instance, Annie says green flower for green flower, and Mom says, "No, honey, that's not a flower, it's a bush." She corrects for truthfulness. It's not a flower, it's a bush. She doesn't tell Annie, say, "That is a green flower," because at this point, Annie wouldn't get it. She's just learning what a bush is. But soon she'll be acquiring more grammar. Her brain will be figuring it all out. If Mom tries to correct her grammar, it's as if Annie doesn't hear the correction at all. She's upset because Mom obviously didn't hear what she had to say. But your child is constantly experimenting with language at this age. You'll hear him frequently overgeneralizing the morpheme or the suffix ed for past tense and the s for pluralization. So he's coming out with sentences like, "Daddy comed out to play with me" instead of "came out to play with me," and "I see my foots" instead of feet. You'll see this because your child's brain is really working to figure this all out. Soon, he'll begin saying, "Daddy came out with me and I see my feet," but he has to learn a rule before knowing where to apply it. And although language is rule-driven, there are, of course, many exceptions to the rules, which also need to be learned. So it really takes time to crack the grammar code. So you might be wondering when your child will learn longer, more complicated types of sentences. Well, let's look at this. 3-year-olds often relate sequences of events, but usually without the appropriate use of the word "and." For instance, he might say, "At school we eat snacks, we play outside, we sing songs." It won't be for another year or so that he'll say, "We eat snacks, play outside, and sing songs." This is a very sophisticated knowledge of our syntactic rule system, but most children actually do master it before kindergarten. Now, all languages are rule-driven, and some rules actually don't even seem to make a lot of sense. For example, in many other languages, but not in English, the adjective comes after the noun, which when you think about it makes a lot more sense than the adjective placement in English. If the English noun is house, let's say, when describing this house, we might say large, brown, dilapidated, 100-year-old, before we even let the listener know that we're talking about a house. We have to hold the pictures of concepts of these adjectives in our memory until we actually have an object to picture as having these attributes. Does that make sense? But we all learn the exact sequence of adjectives that come before a noun. Like you wouldn't say dilapidated, brown, large. But could you explain that rule for this? Probably not. But many children unconsciously know it before the age of 5. So start thinking about the language as you use it every day. How do you know how to make up sentences that you've never uttered in your life? Think about that. And here's something else that you've probably noticed, that between 2 and 3, your child will also begin with the sometimes incessant use of the word why. But it's difficult to formulate whole sentences that begin with why, so young children figure out that it's not really necessary. So this famous word of 2-year-olds is usually spoken all by itself. For instance, Mommy might say, "Stay with Daddy while I go to Aunt Pat's for a little while." And Jenny says, "Why?" Mommy says, "Because she wants to see me." And Jenny says, "Why?" And Mommy says, "Because she has some errands for me to do for her." And Jenny says, "Why?" And Mommy says, "Because she has a cold and she doesn't want to go out." And Jenny says, "Why?" And Mommy says, "Because she might get even sicker." Jenny says, "Why?" And Mommy finally says, "Because it's very cold out today and that's it. Bye-bye, I'll be home soon." End of discussion. Enough to drive you crazy, right? And then soon your child will begin to ask WH questions other than why, like who, what, when, where, and how, even though that's not WH. But at first it won't really be in question form. It will be a statement beginning with the WH word. For example, Michael says, "Where Mommy is?" And Dad says, "Where is Mommy? She's at the store." And Michael says, "When Mommy's coming home?" And Dad says, "When is Mommy coming home?" Pretty soon. As you become more aware of how we use language, you'll begin to understand how much your child is learning about it and what an incredible skill he's developing. Listen to your own language, to how you and others are interacting in conversations, to how you're speaking to your child, and to the words and sentences and body language that you and he are using every day. What can you expect him to understand and to say as his language develops? It is limitless. There's been a lot of research in the area of child language development, and here's what they found. Children develop great speech and language when their parents and caregivers do these things. They ask them questions, especially open-ended questions that don't just require a yes/no answer. You want your child to be able to practice speaking. Parents who engage them in conversations, this lets them know that you're really listening to them, and it's a very important social skill. Parents who read to them often, begin reading to your baby when he or she is an infant. When you read with a lot of expression, your baby's brain is taking in all the words and sentences. even before understanding them. Expand their utterances. Don't try to correct your child's sentences, but repeat them in a grammatically correct way for your child to hear and eventually to use. Parents who are good role models of language. As I said, our children are always listening, and you will be imitated. So speak the way you want your children to speak. Show them how to be social and to get along with others. How do you interact with others? How do you ask questions? How do you compliment someone? How do you express disappointment? All of that. Parents who want to know what their children think about things and events, let your child know that his thoughts and feelings matter. Stay on your child's topic longer. Your child will talk more if he or she is interested in the topic, just like you will. Try to understand their child's attempt at communication. This means being patient while your child practices new words and phrases instead of pointing or using other nonverbal ways to get what he or she wants. Always remember how your child should be speaking at that age. And parents who give their children fewer commands. That doesn't mean parents should not tell their children what to do, but it should be a small percentage of the language the child hears. Turn down the TV, go out and play, and get over here. Might at times be very necessary, of course, but these commands don't teach children the joy of language. Children should enjoy using language to interact with others, learning through language, following directions well, and really being heard. So I hope you'll keep all these ideas in mind, and your child will be growing up with a real joy of language. Now, please write to me in the comments below, ask me questions, give me suggestions. Also, please subscribe to my channel and visit my website, thejoyoflanguage.com. And tell your friends, relatives, preschool teachers, babysitters about my book that explains it all, and of course about my videos. And I'll see you in the next one.